Hey guys, Steven Smelinich here to talk about that one weird anime you were obsessed with as a kid but have long since forgotten. You know, the one with the craziest anime hairstyle ever drawn, in a world where, instead of using your fists or yelling at someone you didn't like, you challenged them to a children's card game. Yu-Gi-Oh!
I'll challenge them to a duel.
And if they bring the police?
I'll challenge the police to a duel too!
Now, when you first think of Yu-Gi-Oh!, you probably assume it's just a silly show that spawned an equally silly card game for little kids. But beneath the surface, Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually explores some surprisingly deep themes. Not just about the power of friendship, but also fate, sacrifice, Egyptian mythology, Jungian psychology, and most importantly, how to summon God. So join me on this journey into the Shadow Realm, spoilers ahead. If you want me to explore more childhood-defining media, let me know in the comments while also clicking the subscribe and like buttons and sharing this video. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was my first entry into anime. I have fond memories of playing the card game with my friends, rushing home after elementary school every Friday to catch the show on Fox Kids at 4 p.m., completely unaware that when characters pointed fingers at each other, they were actually supposed to be pointing guns, but were censored. I later picked up the game in junior high school, where somehow I got away with using overpowered, obviously fake cards. And then in high school, I gave my cards away and had totally forgotten about it for over a decade. It wasn't until a little over a year ago when I was thrust back into the world after editing a Yu-Gi-Oh! Video for Max Sturat, an experience best described by this clip from Death Note. Shout out to Max. Next thing I knew, I was obsessed with Master Duel, recollecting cards like a madman, and then I spent a year in Japan where I collected even more cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Begins with a high schooler, Yugi Moto, solving the Millennium Puzzle, a mysterious artifact given to him by his grandpa, who discovered it in an ancient Egyptian tomb. Yugi is the first person to ever complete the puzzle, which took him 8 years. Upon solving it, a shadow self emerges. Unlike the weak, shy, and friendless Yugi, this version is proud, confident, and absurdly obsessed with playing games against his bullies, only to mind-crush them afterwards. This is Yami Yugi, the self-proclaimed king of games. In The Secret Season 0, which was only released in Japan, Yami Yugi, or Dark Yugi for those of you who don't speak Japanese, starts out as a ruthless enforcer of justice. However, over time, he begins to mellow out and helps Yugi to gain some friends. Then a new game enters the picture, Duel Monsters. It quickly rises in popularity, becoming the top card game. In Duel Monsters, players summon creatures with varying attack points aided by spell and trap cards, with the goal of reducing their opponent's life points to 0. Yugi's grandpa owns a prized card, the Blue Eyes White Dragon, one of the rarest cards, but fellow classmate and multi-billionaire Seto Kaiba finds out, and he decides to take it by force, defeating Grandpa in the children's card game, tearing up the Blue Eyes, and leaves Grandpa so emotionally devastated that he collapses into a coma. Yeah, this show is super absurd, but stay with me. Just before passing out, Grandpa entrusts Yugi with his deck, urging him to trust in the heart of the cards. Yugi has no idea how the weak cards he's drawn could possibly defeat Kaiba, who has already summoned 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons, each boasting 3,000 attack points. But then he remembers his friend's support and draws the head of the unstoppable Exodia, the most powerful card in the game, split into 5 separate pieces. With the other 4 pieces already in his hand, the duel is over instantly. Exodia is the one monster that doesn't need to fight. Once assembled, he simply wins by existing, like the pieces of a puzzle coming together. Like most card games, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is heavily reliant on the luck of the draw, near total reliance on fate. You start with 5 cards in your hand, drawn from a deck of about 40 to 60 cards. And you draw 1 additional card every turn, unless you have a card that allows you to draw more, like the famously banned Pot of Greed. The primary strategy lies in choosing which of over 10,000 and counting cards to include in your deck to maximize your odds of drawing a good hand. You want a deck that's prepared for anything, Of course, preparing for everything is nearly impossible unless you know exactly what's in your opponent's deck. If you're aiming for an Exodia win, the odds of drawing all 5 pieces in your opening hand with a 40 card deck are 1 in 658,008, which is why Kaiba claims no one has ever pulled it off before, as most duelists lose before they can even come close to drawing all 5 pieces. Throughout the series, Yugi, and to a lesser extent his friend Jonochi, displays a unique ability. Whenever he is about to lose, he remembers his friends, trusts in the heart of the cards, and somehow manages to draw exactly the card he needs to win, essentially manipulating fate itself. This ability grows so powerful that at one point he sets a card without even looking at it, fully believing that it's the card he needs to win the duel, and of course he's right. During the Duelist Kingdom arc, Yugi must battle his way to Pegasus, the man responsible for creating duel monsters, in a high-stakes tournament to save his grandpa. Why? Because Pegasus stole Grandpa's soul through a television duel that began with a pre-recorded VHS tape, because magic or shadow games or some other bullcrap. Did I forget to mention that the show can be very absurd? At this point in the series, it was believed that Yami Yugi was simply the shadow of normal Yugi. According to Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, the self is divided into 2 primary parts, the ego and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious. The ego consists of aspects of ourselves that we openly present to the world, while the shadow comprises traits that we suppress out of shame and fear. If these unwanted traits were buried too deeply, we risk becoming what Jung termed shadow-possessed. As Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, you will call it fate." During Duelist Kingdom, Yugi and his friends encounter their shy and timid classmate, Bakura. However, it is soon revealed that Bakura is also possessed by a Millennium item, the Millennium Ring, an artifact similar to Yugi's Millennium Puzzle. The ring harbors a dark presence, and Bakura becomes shadow-possessed as a more domineering personality emerges, challenging Yugi to a shadow game in an attempt to claim the puzzle. Yami Yugi is horrified to discover that his friends have become transformed into the very monsters from their own decks, their souls at risk of being lost to the Shadow Realm. In Japanese, the Shadow Realm is referred to as Yami no Sekai, meaning world of darkness. This is not just a realm of shadows, but a place of total oblivion, a spirit prison, outer darkness, where one's very psyche ceases to exist. This could be analogous to Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, the vast shared domain of human thoughts and instincts, the collective shadow, the deepest layer of the psyche. But within the collective unconscious are what Jung referred to as archetypes, universal symbols that shape human behavior and aspirations. These include figures like the warrior, the magician, and the trickster, roles that individuals often seek to embody. In the Shadow game, Yugi's friends find themselves represented as the very monsters they most identify with, symbolizing their archetypes. Yugi manifests as the Dark Magician, the archetype of the magician representing wisdom and intellect. Yugi rarely wins duels through brute force and strength. Instead, he triumphs with strategy and adaptability. Like Yugi, Dark Magician isn't the most powerful monster, but he compensates with an arsenal of spell and trap cards, reflecting Yugi's ability to outsmart his opponents. Jonochi is the classic underdog, always striving to prove himself as a duelist. His initial signature monster, Flame Swordsman, and later Red Eyes Black Dragon are perfect representations of this archetype. The Red Eyes Black Dragon in particular represents untapped potential, the idea that even those who start from the bottom can rise to greatness. Kaiba, on the other hand, embodies the warrior archetype. His monster, the Blue Eyes White Dragon, is the strongest normal monster in the game, a testament to his Nietzschean will to power. Kaiba sees Blue Eyes as a symbol of his superiority, using sheer strength as both a weapon and a shield for his emotional wounds. Meanwhile, Yami Bakura, as he duels Yami Yugi, an interesting detail emerges. Normal Bakura does not manifest as a monster, but as the spell card Change of Heart. This symbolizes how easily swayed he is between light and darkness. Later, his signature monster, Dark Necrophere, cements his role as the trickster, an archetype of deception and illusion. His Millennium Ring enhances these traits, granting him the power to manipulate perception and vanish at will. At one point, Bakura even deceives Honda into believing he threw away the Millennium Ring, proving that darkness is never so easily discarded. After Yugi defeats Bakura and saves his friends, he continues climbing the ranks of Duelist Kingdom to face Pegasus. However, before he can challenge Pegasus, he must first duel Kaiba, who insists on facing Yugi to save both his brother and his company. It is during this duel that we truly begin to see that Yami Yugi and Ego Yugi may not simply be different aspects of the same psyche, but rather two distinct entities. Despite Kaiba summoning his most powerful monster, Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, boasting a staggering 4,500 attack points, Yugi finds a way to counter it. But as Yugi gains the upper hand, Kaiba takes a desperate step backward onto the edge of the castle's dueling platform, suggesting that if Yugi attacks, the force might thrust him off and plummet to his death. Yami Yugi, consumed by his drive to win, is ready to strike, but before he can, normal Yugi, urged by their friend Anzu, forces a switch, making Yami Yugi stop and consider what he was about to do. At this moment, Yami Yugi realizes that his obsession with victory has blinded him to the consequences. Instead of forcibly suppressing regular Yugi during duels, as he had usually done, he chooses to accept him as his partner. This marks a turning point in their relationship, the beginning of their journey towards mutual understanding. When Yugi finally duels Pegasus, he must contend with Pegasus's most dangerous advantage, the Millennium Eye, an artifact which allows Pegasus to read the souls of his opponents, seeing their thoughts and predicting their strategy. To counter this, regular Yugi suggests that he and Yami Yugi switch places unpredictably throughout the duel, throwing off Pegasus's mind-reading abilities. However, this is extremely dangerous and risky as the Shadow Game threatens to consume normal Yugi's life. The risk nearly becomes reality when Yugi, in a desperate move, sets a card they need to win, but in doing so, it leaves him on the brink of becoming claimed by the Shadow Realm. As the duel unfolds, Yugi confides in his friends about his alternate personality. They come to a shocking realization. Yami Yugi is not just a shadow of Yugi's subconscious, but a man without any memory of his past, apart from the ones he now shares with regular Yugi. After the tournament, Yami Yugi feels an unexplainable pull towards a museum, sensing that it may hold the key to uncovering his lost identity. Yet he hesitates, fearing that he might learn something terrible, yet he ultimately chooses to face his past after going on a date with Anzu.
お前に負け犬の心がわかるかよ。
私なんて何十回って落ちたわ。
おめえも。
でも私は諦めない。だって自分から逃げてたら何にも始まらないでしょ。未来は自分と向き合うところから始まるんじゃない？
そうか。お前も。
It is at this moment that I was reminded of Joseph Campbell's famous quote, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." At the museum, Yugi discovers an ancient Egyptian stone tablet depicting a figure who bears an uncanny resemblance to Yami Yugi, with Dark Magician just above him. A mysterious woman, Ishizu Ishtar, approaches, revealing that he is the spirit of a pharaoh who lived over 3,000 years ago. Ishizu belongs to a secretive organization of gravekeepers, a lineage tasked with protecting the nameless pharaoh's memories. She tells him that in ancient times, the pharaoh had the power to call upon the names of gods to aid him in battles against darkness. These gods were later transformed into cards by Pegasus himself. If Yugi collected all three of these Egyptian god cards, he would unlock the gateway to his lost memories and learn his true self. Yes, the very game Pegasus created was not a mere invention, but rather a reimagining of an ancient Egyptian ritual. 3,000 years ago, magicians dueled not with cards, but with real monsters. In ancient Egypt, it was believed that a god could be summoned to a temple by carving a statue in their likeness, offering sacrifices, sealing its mouth, and reciting a spell. This deity's soul was thought to literally live and breathe within the temple. The Egyptians believed that the soul was composed of multiple parts, but primarily two: Ka, the person's life force or spiritual double, which remained with the body after death; Ba, the personality, which embarked on a spiritual journey after death. Upon death, the heart is weighed on a scale against a feather in the presence of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was as light as the feather, the Ka and Ba would fuse into the Ak, a complete self, achieving eternal existence. In the show, the ancient priests who wielded the Millennium items acted as judges of a person's Ka. If a person's Ka was deemed wicked, it would be forcibly torn from them, sealed within a stone tablet. These same priests could summon their own Ka in battle, much like the duelists in modern era. One such priest, Mahad, fell in battle against the enemy, but in his final act, cast a spell that permanently fused his Ka and Ba together, transforming him into the Dark Magician, his Ak. This allowed him to serve the nameless pharaoh forever, even beyond death. Similarly, priest Seto, the ancient ancestor of Seto Kaiba, encountered a girl named Kisara, whose Ka was the blue-eyes white dragon. After rescuing her from slave traders, Seto found that she was capable of summoning Blue Eyes to protect him, as she did when his village was attacked by bandits. Over time, Seto grew to care for Kisara, but she ultimately sacrificed herself against his own father. In death, she gave Seto her Ka, the Blue Eyes, and allowed him to summon it at his own will. Just as Mahad pledged eternal service to the pharaoh, Kisara pledged hers to Seto, an unbreakable bond that would carry into their reincarnations as Yugimoto and Seto Kaiba. Yugi is not merely shadow-possessed, he is ancestor-possessed. He is the reincarnation of an ancient pharaoh who sealed his Ba inside the Millennium Puzzle, losing all memories of his past life. When Yugi enters his subconscious, his mind is divided between the two Yugis. Regular Yugi's mind is small and childlike, simple and familiar. Meanwhile, the pharaoh's mind is a vast labyrinth where one can easily become lost. This imagery is deeply reminiscent of real Egyptian tombs. Pharaohs were buried within labyrinth structures filled with false doors, hidden passages, and magical inscriptions designed to protect their souls and their secrets. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes the journey of the soul through the duat, the underworld, a maze filled with trials and traps. The soul must answer riddles, navigate secret gates, and prove its worth before reaching paradise. This closely parallels Carl Jung's theory of individuation, which suggests that the human psyche is a maze, and one must navigate their unconscious to achieve self-realization. Similar themes of spiritual progression through hidden knowledge appear in Freemasonry and Mormon temples, both of which trace their lineage, at least symbolically, back to Egypt. The Hiram Abiff legend, for example, central to Freemasonry, tells of a master builder who was murdered before he can complete a sacred temple. This serves as a metaphor for unfinished wisdom, similar to the incomplete Millennium Puzzle. Egyptian priestly rituals emphasize secrecy, initiation, purification, and secret knowledge, elements later reflected in Masonic traditions, Mormon temple rituals, and Western esoteric thought, suggests the shared human instinct to ritualize spiritual progression throughout history. Thus, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not merely a show about a children's card game, it is about a modern myth echoing ancient religious traditions, psychological archetypes, and the timeless quest for self-discovery. It seems that Yugi isn't the only one with ties to ancient Egypt. Bakura, Ishizu Ishtar, and her brother Merrick, Grandpa Muto, and Seto Kaiba all appear to be reincarnations of figures from the past. Through their possession of the Millennium items, Yugi is possessed by the Pharaoh, Bakura by a desert bandit king, and Merrick by an ancient tomb keeper. Each of these spirits resides within the Millennium items, seemingly fated to be passed down to their respective reincarnations. This concept has deep roots in Egyptian mythology, where it was believed that a person's ba could return to the physical world in a new body. Pharaohs in particular were often seen as reincarnations of gods or past rulers, mirroring how Yugi inherits the spirit of a great king. When Kaiba learns that he is the reincarnation of Priest Seto, who became the pharaoh after the Nameless Pharaoh, he outright rejects it. He tells Ishizu that he doesn't believe in fate or destiny. His attitude is reminiscent of Neo from The Matrix.
Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No,
Why not?
because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
In his past life, Priest Seto was the pharaoh's cousin and rival, locked in a constant struggle over the throne. This rivalry is carried over into the present, fueling Kaiba's obsession with defeating Yugi in a proper duel, a fixation that began after his humiliating loss in the first episode. He is determined to prove himself as the true king of games. Kaiba's obsession with surpassing Yugi becomes so extreme that in the sequel movie, The Dark Side of Dimensions, he devises an elaborate plan to follow the pharaoh into the afterlife, just so he can duel him again. His relentless defiance of fate calls to mind the words of the Roman philosopher Boethius in The Consolation of Philosophy from the 6th century AD. Fate guides those who are willing, but drags those who resist. While I remain skeptical of literal ancestor possession, there is no doubt that we inherit traits and unconscious desires from those who came before us. In genetic and psychological terms, we are influenced by the past in ways that we may not even realize. As Carl Jung put it in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, in every one of us there is a prehistoric soul that continues to live. It is the ancient unconscious force that influences our actions, even when we believe ourselves free. When Kaiba visits the museum, Ishizu presents him with the stone tablet depicting his past life and the legendary Egyptian god cards. As a test of fate, she entrusts him with Obelisk the Tormentor. Meanwhile, the other two god cards, Slifer the Sky Dragon and the Winged Dragon of Ra, have been stolen by Merrick Ishtar, who seeks revenge against the pharaoh. Merrick's hatred stems from the suffering he endured as a tomb keeper, a lineage bound to protect the pharaoh's secrets. Raised under a brutal, oppressive tradition, Merrick was forced to endure painful markings burned into his back, a ritual that bound him to his ancestral duty. Desperate for freedom, he succumbed to the Millennium Rod's power, and while being shadow or ancestor possessed, murdered his own father. Kaiba, now in possession of Obelisk, decides to host a tournament to draw out Merrick and his rare hunters, knowing they will be drawn to the power of the god card. When Kaiba faced Ishizu in the semifinals, he was up against fate itself. Ishizu possessed the Millennium Necklace, an artifact that granted her the ability to see the future. She predicted her own victory, foreseeing that she would systematically deplete Kaiba's deck and plant a trap which would destroy Obelisk the Tormentor the moment Kaiba attempted to use it against her. At first, Kaiba played directly into her plan until he felt a powerful, almost supernatural pull from his signature card, Blue Eyes White Dragon. In that moment, he experienced a vision of the past. Priest Seto holding Kisara's lifeless body in front of a stone tablet depicting the Blue Eyes White Dragon. Trusting in the power of the Blue Eyes White Dragon, Kaiba sacrificed Obelisk to summon it, and against all odds, he won the duel. Kaiba had been fated to lose, but his deep ancestral connection to the past saved him, allowing him to defy fate itself. The Egyptian god cards represent the ultimate power, an unstoppable force, a connection to something far greater than mere mortals. They serve as archetypes, drawing out the god within oneself, becoming an unstoppable force of nature. Each card embodies a fundamental principle. Slifer the Sky Dragon, Yugi's card, represents wisdom and knowledge. Obelisk the Tormentor, Kaiba's card, represents overwhelming strength and power. And the Winged Dragon of Ra, Merrick's card, represents sacrifice and rebirth. In the original Japanese, Slifer the Sky Dragon is called Orishu no Tenkiru, which translates to the Celestial Dragon of Osiris. This directly references Osiris, the Egyptian god of wisdom and the underworld. According to mythology, Osiris was Egypt's first king, but his jealous brother Set murdered him, dismembering his body and scattered the pieces throughout the land. Osiris's wife Isis gathered the fragments to resurrect him, except for one crucial missing part, his genitals, preventing him from fully returning to life. As a result, Osiris became king of the underworld, where he judged the souls of the dead. This ties directly into Osiris's ability in the game. Osiris's attack power is determined by the number of cards in your hand. The more knowledge you possess, the stronger it becomes. If you have 7 cards in your hand, then Osiris's attack and defense reach 7,000. Osiris's second ability is that it judges weaker monsters. Upon their summoning, it reduces their attack points by 2,000, and if their attack drops to 0, they are instantly destroyed. This reflects Osiris's role as the ultimate judge of the dead. Yugi proves himself worthy to wield Osiris in a duel against mind-controlled puppet of Merrick. Merrick, believing himself untouchable, had constructed an unstoppable strategy, a card that allowed him to exceed the 6-card limit in his hand, letting him hold unlimited cards, and 2, another card that forced him to draw 3 cards every time a revivable monster was destroyed. At first glance, this seemed like an unbeatable combination. Merrick could build an unlimited resources while endlessly recycling his monsters. However, Yugi outwitted him. By taking control of the revivable monster, Yugi forced Osiris's effect to activate every time it revived, triggering Merrick's forced draw effect. This created an infinite loop, forcing Merrick to draw until his deck was completely depleted, leaving the puppet unable to play any more cards, proving himself the true wielder of Osiris the Divine Dragon. Unlike the other Egyptian god cards, Obelisk the Tormentor is not directly named after a specific Egyptian deity. Instead, it takes its name from the obelisk, a towering stone tower symbolizing divine power and strength. In ancient Egypt, obelisks represented Ra's divine authority and the pharaoh's absolute right to rule. These massive monuments were erected as indestructible symbols of control, meant to stand immovable for eternity. They also represent the primordial mound, the foundation upon which Ra fashioned the world at creation. Fittingly, Obelisk the Tormentor is the only god card with a fixed attack and defense, 4,000 points each, unaffected by external conditions. It possesses a devastating ability. By attributing 2 monsters, it can wipe out all enemy monsters on the field. In the anime, this power goes even further. Obelisk can tribute monsters to make its attack points infinite, striking down every monster in a single overwhelming assault. Unlike the other god cards, Obelisk is the only one with inherited protection in the trading card game, as it cannot be targeted by effects, mirroring its symbolic immovability. This resilience is demonstrated in the anime when it famously punches through Mirror Force, a powerful trap card that should have destroyed it. Obelisk's wielder, Seto Kaiba, embodies this nature. His name is a direct reference to Set, the god who rivals Osiris. As the reincarnation of Priest Seto, who became pharaoh after the nameless pharaoh, Kaiba is deemed worthy to wield Obelisk. He walks through life with absolute confidence, refusing to show any weakness. Yet his unwillingness to acknowledge his own vulnerabilities ultimately becomes his downfall. Now you can summon all the knowledge and willpower you want, but without a proper sacrifice they amount to nothing. That is where the final Egyptian god card, the Winged Dragon of Ra, comes into place as the most powerful, but also most demanding. Unlike Obelisk, which stands as a symbol of immovable strength, Ra is dynamic, ever-changing, and fueled by sacrifice. Ra is named after the supreme creator god, who is not just the god of the sun, but the sun itself. as Egyptian mythology describes his daily life cycle. In the morning, he is born at sunrise. At noon, he reaches his peak power as Ra-Harakti, the falcon-headed sun god. In the evening, he dies at sunset, descending into the underworld, and during the night in the Duat, Ra battles Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, who seeks to devour him and plunge the world into eternal darkness. And at dawn, Ra triumphs and is reborn, and the cycle continues. This eternal cycle of death and rebirth, as represented by the Egyptian symbol of the Ouroboros, was considered proof that death was not the end, but rather a transition, a concept deeply tied to Ra's card effect. According to various texts, Ra either spoke the world into existence or masturbated it into being, both interpretations emphasizing that creation is an act of will, power, knowledge, and sacrifice. Speech, in particular, held great significance in ancient Egyptian belief. The spoken word had the power to bring ideas into reality. Saying the word chair conjures its image in the mind, allowing it to be physically built. Speaking affirmations to oneself is a spell of self-empowerment, reinforcing confidence and action. Ra was the keeper of many powerful spells and secrets, including those found in the Book of the Dead, which contained incantations necessary to navigate the afterlife. This connection to speech, divine knowledge, is reflected in Ra's card effect in the anime. The hierarchic script in Ra's card can only be read by those with ties to ancient Egypt. If a duelist cannot recite the chant, Ra remains trapped in its primordial egg form, an unhatched god. Only by speaking the correct words can Ra hatch into a phoenix, mirroring Egyptian myths of the Bennu bird, a divine creature of resurrection. Unlike Osiris and Obelisk, Ra's strength depends entirely on sacrifices and is used to summon it. This reflects Ra's mythological nature. True power requires giving something up. A duelist can choose 3 monsters to sacrifice, transferring their total attack and defense to Ra. Alternatively, a duelist can sacrifice their own life points, as Merrick famously does, leaving himself with only 1 life point, utilizing Ra's destructive power of 1 turn kill. If the duelist has remaining life points, they can spend 1,000 life points per enemy monster to wipe the field. This demanding nature makes Ra the most powerful god card, but also the most difficult to wield, requiring the ultimate price, sacrifice. Merrick Ishtar is consumed by his quest for revenge against the pharaoh. He sacrifices everything in pursuit of his goal: his father, his royal rare hunters, and ultimately his own soul. His hatred and obsession grow so intense that he becomes shadow possessed by his tomb keeper ancestor, a being far more wicked than himself. This possession forces Merrick into an eternal battle for control over his own body. In the end, he is forced with a choice: continue down his path of destruction or accept his fate and aid the nameless pharaoh instead of trying to destroy him. As psychoanalyst Jordan Peterson puts it,
you get to pick your damn sacrifice. That's all. You don't get to not make one. You're sacrificial whether you want to be or not. That's a good thing to know as well.
there will always be something holding you back, a vice, a fear, or an attachment. You can either choose to sacrifice it or grow beyond it, or hold on to it and sacrifice your potential instead. Every day you must make this choice. Act or waste another day of your limited life. At the end of the Battle City arc, after Yugi defeats both Kaiba and Merrick, claiming their Egyptian god cards, his next task is to travel to Egypt and uncover his lost name. He enters a memory world where he faces his final challenge, a battle against Yami Bakura, who has summoned the ultimate evil, Zorg, Necrophades. The Egyptian god cards represent divine forces of order. In contrast, Zork is the embodiment of ultimate corruption, a monstrous force of destruction possession born from countless restless souls sacrificed to create the Millennium items. This sacrifice, of course, was ordered by the nameless pharaoh's uncle when his father was king. Bandit King Bakura, a child during the village slaughter, became obsessed with revenge, and in his rage, he unleashed Zork. Zork is a grotesque being which threatens to consume reality itself in eternal darkness. His serpent-like dragon phallus is a representation of greed, excess, and blasphemy, echoing imagery of certain demons from Japanese mythology, which symbolize corruption that spirals beyond control. Zork embodies chaotic masculinity turned monstrous, a force that dominates but cannot create. He's the ultimate manifestation of evil within the hearts of men. The only way to defeat him is for the nameless pharaoh to learn his true name. In ancient Egypt, every soul possessed a ren, a secret name that contained their hidden potential and power. To know one's ren was to command one's true strength. But if that name was ever revealed to the wrong person, one's power could be stolen. Just like how Isis tricked Ra into revealing his secret name, allowing her son Horus to inherit his divine strength. After being poisoned by a serpent, Ra begged for healing, but Isis refused to cure him until he spoke his true name. In the memory world, as the pharaoh struggles against Zork, his friends search for his hidden tomb, where his secret name is inscribed. That name is revealed to be Atem, the name of Ra in his primordial state when he created the cosmos. The name itself means the complete one. With his true name restored, Atem gains absolute command over the Egyptian god cards, allowing him to summon the true god, Hlakti, the creator of light. Hlakti is Ra's power at its peak, the god at high noon, when his strength is at its fullest. Like Exodia, Hlakti does not fight, it simply wins by its very presence, obliterating Zork completely. Pharaohs were expected to prove their divine right to rule. To remain king, a pharaoh had to demonstrate his favor with the gods, reaffirming his power through ritual combat and sacred trials. With Atem's journey at its end, there remained one final task. Someone had to dethrone him so he could pass on to the afterlife. Many stepped up to challenge him, but Yugi knew in his heart that he had to be the one to defeat Atem and set him free. Thus, in a final ritual duel, the two Yugis split apart. Atem and Yugi no longer one entity, but two separate souls. For Yugi, this was more than just a duel. It was to prove that he could stand on his own, that he no longer needed Atem to fight his battles for him. This was his rite of passage, the moment he would leave the nest and spread his wings. Atem summons all three Egyptian god cards, yet Yugi manages to defeat all of them in a single turn, using their power against them. In the dubbed version, even Kaiba finally acknowledges Yugi as the true king of games, the rightful successor to Atem.
「俺の負けだ相棒」「立て勝者がひざまずいてどうするんだ俺がお前なら涙は見せないぜ僕は弱虫だから僕にとって君はずっと目標だった君みたいに強くなりたくてずっとお前は弱虫なんかじゃないずっと誰にも負けない強さを持っていたじゃないか優しさって強さを俺はお前から教わったんだぜ相棒
When the duel was over and Yugi emerged victorious, Atem smiled and bid farewell to his friends, giving them one final thumbs up. He stepped into the afterlife and was greeted by his ancient priests, his work on Earth finally complete. Atem had achieved Jungian individuation, bringing his shadow to the surface, integrating it with his ego and becoming whole. Meanwhile, Yugi himself had transcended, stepping into the role of a Tem and becoming his own complete self. As above, so below. At its core, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a journey of self-discovery. Yugi begins his story as a timid boy who solves the puzzle of his own mind, becomes possessed by his ancestor and fate, and through the power of friendship and perseverance, gains strength to overcome his insecurities and understand his own self. In the end, he does not need a Tem anymore because he has become just as a Tem did before him. In life, we build our own decks. We gather our tools, knowledge, and experience to repair ourselves. But when we step out into the world, we must play with the cards fate has dealt us. The question is, how will you play your hand? Do you have the courage to call upon God, to transcend, to become the master of your own fate? If you are someone like Neo who does not like the concept of fate, remember this: fate is not your enemy. It can be your most powerful tool.
It's time to duel!
As always, thanks for watching. Tell me in the comments section, what card do you think best represents you and your inner archetype? And of course, subscribe, like the video, share it, and always remember to keep it righteous.